Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll Masechtas Bava Kama, Daf Samach Ches. We're going to begin on Samach Zayin Amud Beis, about 5 lines from the bottom by the 2 dots. Ein hagoinev achar haganim misham tashum kefil. So the din of paying kefil when a person steals, that only applies to the ganav himself. But if ganav number 2 steals from ganav number 1, there's no din kefil. Amarav lo shanu. The only time we say that din is only el lifnei yesh. Before there was actually yesh of the original owner. Of al yesh, if let's say the original owner gave up on it, then kainu ganav rishon. So as we've been discussing, the ganav could possibly be kainu with yesh bichti, greda by itself, and therefore once the ganav is now the owner, it's considered like rishus abal. The ganav sheni misham tashumi kefil. With Ganav Rishon. Therefore, the Ganav Sheni will have to pay the Ganav Rishon because the Ganav Rishon now took upon himself certain levels of ownership. Omer Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes is a miniki noimash ushachiv Rab ermul hashmaisa. This is a statement that's often said that Rab was probably dozing off when he said this. The Sanya. As after all, we learned that Omer Bikiva said Ma Omer Torah. Why does the Torah say that Tavcha Macham Misham Tashmi Arba V'Chamisha? That not only do you have to pay kefil by stealing, but if you now go ahead afterwards and you shecht or slaughter, that there's an additional requirement that instead of paying just kefil, you have to pay actually arba v'chamisha. It's interesting language because you rooted yourself in sin, says Rashi. Also shiroshin you strengthen the sin. Shikanu umahadhu masai. So Amos, when exactly do we say this took place? If we're talking about that this was all done before Yeush, that the original owner still is hoping to get it back as we continue to Samach Ches Amud Aleph. So Mi'ika Nishtaresh. How do you use this language of being rooted in sin, says Rashi? Alohanum Masav. Your actions didn't do anything. Deshini Rishus, Shishinu Rishuso, Rishus Lekech, Blo Yeush. The fact that it was just transferred from point A to point B, but the original owner still has some hopes in getting it back. It's lifnei yish. It's not yours. So how do we understand that it's just shtar shbechet? We didn't do anything. El yish. It must be it's talking about it's after yish. The original owner doesn't expect to get it back. And the Rashi says the hashta kani lokech. And therefore, what happens? The lekech is kind of betarti yish v'shini rishus. There was a change of domain, and yish together is how come the ganav now is the owner. Now, it's interesting if now there's after yish, yish kani. If yish taka works, so my mishom tashim v'chamisha shlohu tavech shlohu moicher. He shouldn't be chayav dal v'hei since there is a kinyan. So nonetheless, we still say Yischayev. So what do we say? That, there's a difference between Lifnei Yesh and Achar Yesh, because Achar Yesh already, the Ganav Sheni has to pay the Ganav Rishon, because the Ganav Rishon is Kaina. What do you mean? We don't see this over here. We see that even though there was Yesh, there's still Chiv Adal V'hei. So Amri, Kinemarava, Mipnei Sheshana Machat. Hachinami, Mipnei Sheshana Machat. So there's a different language. Says Rashi, really this took place before Yesh, which means even though it was a Shini Rishus, but without Yesh it's not a Kinyan, so it's not Hanamasav. The point is, even though you actually haven't done any action which causes you to have any level of ownership, or that it's now more taken out of the domain of the original owner, it doesn't make any difference. There's still a chiyuv, and therefore this is not a raya. Maybe that's only because it's lifnei yesh. But le'achar yesh, again, the din may be different. Tashma. So the pasuk says, "Utavachay mecharai," that you slaughter a soul. So matvicha shenoch zeres. When you shech something, you can't resurrect it from the dead. It's dead. It can't be returned. Mechira shenoch zeres. So too, when we're talking about a mechira, it's a mechira gemura. An actual complete sale. Now, Amos, when exactly did this take place? Why do we say that it does not go back to the original owner. After all, even if there was a shini rishus, if there's no yish, again, no one holds your kaina. We're talking about those shini rishus and yish, and therefore that is the reason why it's going to be chayv and dal dehay, because it's after yish. Now, if you want to tell me that the first ganav is kainet, then so my mishalim dal dehay shalahu tavach shalahu mayicher. So it must be yish alone isn't enough for the ganav to be chayv, since otherwise he'd own it and later selling it he shouldn't be chayv dal dehay. So the answers kid the Omer of Nachman prat shehish. Let me say the word again. Prat shehikna l'shloishim yoim. Hachinami prat l'shehikna l'shloishim yoim. No, we're not talking about a mechir shenu chazeres. Has nothing to do with our case, because Rashi says l'oil lifnei yish. Really, the mechir could have happened before, but nonetheless, you could still be chayiv. What do you mean if it's lifnei yish? It's going to go back. That's not what it means. That's not the drasha that it's mechir shenu chazeres. V'hai enu chazeres akatani lo miyuti heichadolei hanu ma'asav. De'avla dolo hanu chayiv b'rachmana hoy b'shana b'chet. Since you're shana b'chet, even though again you didn't actually do an action that you were kain it because of lifnei yish, even though it's a shini rishus, still you're not kain it. Nonetheless, you can still be chay lifnei yish because you're shana b'chet. Elam miyuti heichadolei machar ganav v'lekech el lasas b'malacha shloshim yom. You only sold it for 30 days. He kaschiras ba'alma. It's like renting. And the pasuk of Dal V'Hei is dafka mechira, not schira. So you can make that. You can push it to say, well, what do you mean? It's mechira, not schira. It's not schiras ba'alma. Okay. So that's how we answer this question. Question 1. So so is oifen mechira asa kro lafuke. So the second answer, push it, is if you sell for 30 days, so it's like renting it. Or it's according to the Mandi Omer, the mechira, we're talking about the Mandi Omer, says it's mechira lifnei yish, but it's shana b'chet. Since it's shana b'chet, even though you didn't actually, it's not a hanu masav, it doesn't make any difference, you can still be chayv. Meisavei. So now the Gemara continues with the question. Ganav, a person stole, uva acher v'ganvai, which is how we started off over here. Someone else came and stole it from him. So you have Ganav number 1 and then Ganav number 2. Harisham misham tasham mikefel. So the din is that the first person who wants to do tshuva, he has to give to the Baal kefel, because he was a Ganav, so he stole, there's a chi of kefel. Vasheni and misham el keren bovad. The second one only has to pay back the principal. Says Rashi, Laganav Rishain, Dechsiv, Begunim Mebesa Ish. So there's the chiv of kefel is only when you steal it from the original owner. That's the reason why Ganav number 1 has to pay kefel. But Ganav number 2, since he stole it from Ganav number 1, that goes against the pasuk of Begunim Mebesa Ish. You didn't steal it from the original owner, you stole it from a Ganav. So therefore, there's no chiv of giving kefel, but at least you have to be, of course, return the object, which is the keren, or its value. Ganav machar uva acher v'ganvai. Let's say it's a little different. You stole it and you sold it, which is a chiyuv of dal v'hei, and then someone comes from that other person and then steals it. So obviously, because the first one, he stole it and he also sold it. So he has a chiyuv dal b'hei. Now the second person who stole from the lokeach, he has to pay to the lokeach, because now the lokeach is considered to be mebeis ish, because now that it was purchased, even though again the ganav somehow was kind it, and therefore he had the ability to sell it. So now this new owner, who has these stolen goods, it's still considered to be his because he did pay for it. Again, the Ganav shouldn't have stolen it in the first place, but now he sold it to me, so that's the din. Now, Ganav v'tavach. Let's say you have a person who stole and shechted, and then someone else came and stole the meat. So Harish Misham Tashum Midal Hay, because he stole and shechted, which is a Chiv Dal Hay. Vasheni Misham Tashum Kefel El Karen Bovad. The second person only has to pay back Karen. And Rashi says it'll come in Parach, Milo Misham Kefel, you should have to pay double. Kani Ganav Rishon B'Shinei Maisa. You would maybe think the Shechita is a Shinei Maisa, and therefore the Ganav should now be the owner, and therefore it is Mebesa Ish. But for some reason, it sounds like the Ganav Rishon, who shechted, he never acquired it, and therefore, because of that, the second Ganav doesn't have to pay Kefal, only Karen. Okay. So Katani Miyam Mitziasa, nonetheless, we learned in the middle case, Ganav Machar, if a person stole and sold, so that sounds pretty obvious. But the Chiddush is the second person who stole it from the person who was sold to. We say that he has to pay the kefel, as we said, to the lokach, to this new buyer. Now, Amos, when did all this take place? When was this sale? So if it was done before Yish, that the original owner is still hoping to get it back. So Sheni Amay Misham Tashmi Kefel, why do we say why should the second person have to give kefel to the lokeach? So the buyer is not considered to be the mebesa ish, because it's owned by the original owner, because there was no yish. So it doesn't matter Shini Rishus. Shini Rishus alone doesn't work. Shini Rishus with Yish, but if they Yish, it shouldn't be Kaina, which means the second Ganav shouldn't have to pay the Lokeach Kefel. So why does he pay Kefel? It must be El Pshito after Yish. We're talking about a case that's after Yish. It says Rashi, the Ikatarti be Lokeach. Two things happen in the hands of the buyer. There's a Shini Rishus. He bought it. It was a Shina Rishus from the original person to the Ganav, but certainly from the Ganav who ended up being the Moicher to the Lekeach. So now the buyer, there's a Shina Rishus and there's also Yesh. So now the Lekeach owns it, and therefore it makes sense the reason why the Ganav Sheni has to pay Kefel to this new buyer. But if Yesh works, why does the first person have to pay Dal the Hay? Didehu Dezoven. Right, but Yish alone doesn't work, so you need both. So it's a question. Pursue, and furthermore, the Gatani Reisha, the first case, Ganav Avachar Ganvoi, similar to our Mishnah. First, you have a Ganav, number one, and then you have Ganav, number two. So we said the first one has to pay Kefel, and the second one only has to pay Karen, which is mashma because the first Ganav was not Kaina. Harish Misham Tashemi Kefel, I get that. But Sheni and Misham El Karen, the Michti. We have established this whole case, all these cases, for it to remain consistent, is Le'achar Yesh. Now, if it's after Yesh, he's talking about Yesh Kaina, Sheni Mayna Mishal El Karen, doesn't make any sense. He should have to pay Kefel, because the Ganav Rishon, if there was Yesh, it's Achar Yesh, and you hold the Yesh is Kaina, so then the second Ganav is stealing Mebesa Ish. He's not stealing from a Ganav, and therefore he should have to pay Kefil. Why does he only have to pay Karen? It must be, even though this after Yish, we see clearly that even though there was Yish, we still see the fact that the second Ganav doesn't have to pay Kefil, he has to pay Karen. That itself is a Raya against the Sheet of Rav, and therefore we see that Yish is not kind of. So Amar Rava says, 1 second, but Tizbra, does that make sense to you? Do you really think this is logical? You think this is the proper svaram? Tiny Seifa. Look at the last case. It says like this: Ganav Tavach. The Imam shechted. He did a Maisa b'yadayim. Someone else comes and steals that meat. Okay, that you can't disagree with. You have to pay Dal V'Hei because you did Geneva and then you did the Tficha, the shechting. But listen to this. Karen, the second Ganav only pays Karen for what he stole. 1 second. We're talking about a case, okay, maybe Achar Yish is not Kaina, as we said in that case, But over here, how could you say he's not kaina? How could the first ganav not be kaina? Me, kolman di'er mashinim maisa kani. He did a maisa shchita. Shchita is an action. So a maisa to this animal, he should certainly be the owner. So the whole thing doesn't make sense. How do we understand? This is what we already saw in Rashi. The l'chara, it's illogical because, okay, fine, the middle case you maybe have a kash on Rav, but here you can kash on the whole world, because how's it shaykh that the person who did tficha, that's not considered to be a kinyan? He should certainly be koinen, but it says he's only gets Karen, not kefil. So elul oilum kul if yish. Really, this whole case is before yish, because after yish, the din is, as I hold, the din is it's koinen. But all these cases are really talking about lifnei yish. You have to flip the second and the third case around so it's more logical. A person stole and sold, and then someone else came and stole. Okay, so again, the first part is no issue. So the first guy, because he sold it, has to pay dal dehay. But here's the point: Vasheni, the second person who stole it from the one who it was sold to, Adam Shalom El Karen, he only pays just the Karen. Why? Why only the Karen? How about the Lokech? The Shini Rishus, Bo Yish Lokani, as we said. Great, there was a Shini Rishus, but the Lokech doesn't get Kefel. Unlike, again, we flipped it around. He only gets Karen because we're talking about Lifnei Yish. So Shini Rishus together with the Yish is not enough. And therefore, that would not work. And therefore, all the Ganav Sheni would have to give to the Lokech is the Karen, the principal, back. And then the other way of reading the next case is Ganav Atavach Uvacher V'Ganvo. So someone, again, shechted the meat, and the second guy stole that. So Harish Mishom Tashim Chamisha. Again, there's nothing to argue there. It's Beferis in the Torah. But the Chiddush is the way you read this. Certainly, the second one will have to pay kefel, the kanya b'shini ma'isa, because the ganav rishon, the first ganav, when he shechted it, he was kind of b'shini ma'isa, so it's like it's his. So when the second guy came afterwards and stole the meat, he has to pay back kefel. That's answer number one. Don't switch it around. In other words, by the case of the mechira, say that the second person is chayv kefil. By the case of the tficha, he only has to pay karen. But the problem, of course, is it's hard to understand. After all, tficha is a ma'isa. If it's a ma'isa, it should be a kinyan. Who says it wouldn't work? So in this, seifa be'shamahi, the case of the tficha is like the shita be'shamai. The army shini b'mkoima oimed, as we saw before by the din of Esnan, that even though the ganav did shchita, according to be'shamai, it isn't kaina. So the second person only pays Karen. So it's true. We asked the question, is there anyone, the answer is yes. Beishamai. If that's the case, so if we're talking about Lifnei Yesh, fine, that was the first answer. But again, okay, so we answered the question regarding the tficha. Okay, the tficha, for whatever reason, that's not considered to be a kinyan. That's not not, even if a mice is not going to be kaina, which is unbelievable. That's a sheet of Beishamai. But still, we have the kasha on the first and certainly the second case. That why is it that the din is, let's say, go again by the mechira? Now we say that the lokeach gets kefel, right? So that's what we said, that in this case, that the sheni the second person has to pay kefel. So how do we understand that? So we said, it's talking about le'achar yesh. If it's after yesh, so why? How do we understand that? Why should you? The question is, why should he have to pay dal v'hei? After all, he sold that which was his. It's already, it was kind of, if you're kind of lachar yish, so at the time of the geneva, it's already yours. So therefore, as we said before, you shouldn't be chayv dal v'hei. You're only chayv dal v'hei when you shecht or sell something which is not yours. But if you were kind it before, then it's yours, and therefore you're not chayiv dalad v'hei. You'll be chayiv kefel, but you're not going to be chayiv dalad v'hei. So that's a kasha. Really, it's all before yish, which is similar to our first answer. Here what are we talking about? This yaishu habalim b'leikeach v'nis yaishu beganav. So the Baal wasn't miyayish right away. The original owner actually thought he was going to get it back, but until after the Ganav sold it. So when the Ganav had it originally, there was no Yish. It was Lifnei Yish. So after there was Yish, when was there Yish? It was once he sold it. So there wasn't Yish in the hands of the first Ganav. Only by the Lokeach was he miyayish. So the first Ganav, it was Lifnei Yish. And therefore, when he sold it, it wasn't his, and that's why he's chayav to pay dal v'hei. However, after it was sold, then the original owner, then Yish kicked in, and therefore that's the reason why now the Lokech is the owner, which is why if someone subsequently would have stolen it from the buyer, then he would have to pay them kefil. Okay. Shini Rishos, okay. You don't really need Shini Rishos because according to him, Yish alone works. That's why it's in parentheses. But it's true. When you sold it, there was also Shini Rishos, but you don't need the Shini Rishos. According to him, just the Yish is alone. Don't tell me that you need both. Even if all you had was the Yish alone when it was sold. Gabi Ganav El Dolomishkachas Nashumi Tervayu. We don't find that people are going to have to pay Ganav Rishon, Ganav Sheni, El Bahachi. Only in this particular way. We want to give it a case where the Ganav has to pay something, and the first Ganav has to pay something, and the second person has to pay something, and we talk about that in a case of Dalad V'hei. It has to be with a case of Dalad V'hei, and therefore that's how it's shaykh to be able to say that the first Ganav has to pay Dalad V'hei. The second Ganav will have to pay Kefel. Because we only have to establish that only in the case where there was an actual mechira, right? And therefore, if it's a mechira, obviously there's a shin rishus. Okay, but the truth is you don't need a shin rishus. We're talking about yish alone would work. Itmar hamaychlef ne yish. So let's say someone sold something before yish, which means the owner at this precise time is expecting to get this item back. So Rav Nachman Amar Chai, Rav Sheshes Amar Potter. So in this case, we have a machlokas whether or not you're going to be chayiv in this case. And this is lifnei yish, which means, again, the owner still expects it back. So I'm not going to chayiv, because umachor imrachmana v'hazavin. So it says he sold it. So in that case, losh lifnei yish, losh l'achar yish. In either situation, he holds that you're going to be chayiv, lifnei yish or even l'achar yish. Doesn't make any difference, because after all, you sold it. And therefore, if you sold it, you sold it. It says, interestingly enough, the only time you're chayiv for selling dal v'hei is only if you already acquired it, because it's after yish. Because since the Ganav acquired it, so in that case, it's a hanamaisav. Since you've done this, that you're now koine, and then you sell it, therefore by you doing that, that in itself is the reason why you're chayiv. Elef neiyish. So this is unlike the shita of Rav, that if it was before Yeish and you sold it, then you would not be chayiv according to him, because it has to be just like tficha. A tficha, your mamish doing some action that causes you to be koinit, not like Beis Shammai. In general, it's a shiri maisa. Certainly, so you're hanamaisav, you're koinit. So it has to be also, when it comes to mechir, it has to be something that you're koinit, and therefore that's the only time that that would be the zman chiyuv. Amar Sheshes, mina minala. How do I know that you're going to be potter in this case? Again, that according to Rav Sheshes, the chiyuv is only after yish, but not before yish. So how do I know? This is a sign. Why are you chayav 4 and 5? Because you actually did something. Your actions, you were koine it, and therefore that's the reason why you're chayav for doing something much worse. You rooted yourself in sin. If it was before Yish, so you don't own it, so you're not in the Shtarish. And the Shtarish, as we're translating, is that you actually did something that now you're kind of the object. It's all talking about Lachar Yish, and therefore the whole Chiyuv is only after Yish. He says, no, it's Mipnei Shana Chet, as we said before, which means it really could be talking about Lifnei Yish, you can be Chayiv just as much as Lachar Yish. Okay. Tashma. They both have to be something that cannot be undone. So Amos, because it belongs to the owner and he hasn't given up hope. We see clearly the fact that it's talking about Yish, that's what it's talking about, because that's what something was not Chazeres, because you're kainit, and therefore it doesn't go back to the original owner. Fine. As we said, we're talking about a case where it was only like a schirus that was rented out for 30 days. In that case, the din is it is not considered to be a mechira, a real halachic mechira, and therefore you're not going to be chayiv dal v'hei. The af Rabbi Lezer savar chayuv l'achar yeshu. Even Rabbi Lezer holds, like the shita of Rav Sheshes, that the entire chiyuv is only after Yish, but not before Yish. How do we see that even Rabbi Lezer agrees to the Shita Rav Shimon? The Rabbi Lezer, as we continue to Samach Chesam and Beis, that he says as follows. Teda, I'll prove it to you. Shestam Geneva Yish Ba'ilmhu. We know that generally speaking, when someone steals something, according to this opinion, there's Yish Ba'ilm. You're not expecting to get it back. It was stolen in private. You have no idea who stole it. You're not going to get it back. So Stam Geneva Yish Ba'ilm, which means if we're talking about a case of Geneva, right off the gate, right away, it's already Lachar Yish. It says you still have to pay 4 and 5. But Dilma lo Yayish, so maybe he was not Miyayish. So how do you know? Why would you pay Dal V'Hei? So it's a proof. It must be talking about a case of after Yish and still you're chayiv. Now, maybe it's coming to tell you that even without Yish you're still chayiv. How do we know it's coming to tell you that you're only chayiv if it's after Yish? Maybe even before Yish you're chayiv too. Don't think that, because you actually did something on mechira dehanu ma'asav. So it must be only after Yish, but not before Yish. Now, Mayahanu, what have you done? Vadilma deshame diayish. Maybe you heard the guy was miyayish. Maybe you actually heard that he was miyayish. Okay, fine, and that's when there's a chiyuv. So amri lo sagadaitach dilma tvicha matvicha will alter af mechira will alter. Now, when it comes to shechting, it's done immediately. So too, when it comes to mechira, it's will alter, because if stam genev is yish ba'ilum, the second that you shecht, it is immediate that an action took place. So to mechira, and therefore it has to be that it's after yish. Armalei. So fine. So let's look at question 2a. Heich hoichiach abelezer medin mechira the stam genev yish ba'ilum the dilman dishamadi yayish. How do we know that we assume always that it's considered like it's stolen? Maybe it's only because you heard it was stolen. If you didn't hear about it, then in that case you wouldn't be chayiv. They'll alter. When it comes to tficha, it has to work immediately. So too, it happens immediately. You shech it immediately. So the mechira is also the alter. When it comes to stealing a person, kidnapping, shein yish ba'ilum v'chayiv. Now, when it comes to kidnapping, the din is that there is no yish because you stole me. Oh, I'm not miyayish on myself, and nonetheless you're still chayiv. So we see clearly when it comes to geneva b'nefesh that they're talking about lifnei yish. Says Rashi, hagoynev nefesh u'machroi ein kan yish. There's no yish. Says Rashi, she'ein adam is yayish al atzma. You don't give up on yourself. Nonetheless you're still chayiv. So we see when it comes to the din of geneva b'nefesh, that's the din. It's considered to be an element of of lifnei yish. So mechlal desavar Rabbi Yochanan lifnei yish chayiv. It must be that we can derive from here that according to the shita of Rabbi Yochanan, the fact that he says this, it must be holds that you're chayiv lifnei yish because he brought a proof from geneva b'nefesh. So hold off on that. So in the Seres Dibros, we actually say lo signoiv. Lo signoiv, which is interesting, is not gazela, since kidnapping is stealing in a hidden fashion from parents. So the question is, there could be yishbalim on the parents, but since the child themselves is not miyayish, so therefore that's the whole Indian. But lo signoiv is geneva b'nefesh. So if it's geneva b'nefesh, maybe there is yish regarding to the parents, but again, the individual is what we're talking about. So according to the sheet of Rav Yochanan, he holds that lifnei yish you're chayev. Habalei acher yish mais. Rav Yochanan chayev. So Rav Yochanan actually holds that you're going to be chayev both before and after yish, which is like Rav Nachman. Reish Lakish Amar Potter. Reish Lakish holds no, you're only chayev before yish, but after yish you are you're going to be potter, which is interesting. Rav Shimon says the opposite. You're only chayev after yish. So Reish Lakish and Rav Shimon say the opposite thing. So there's really three shittas. Rav Yochanan holds you're always chayev if it was sold lifnei yish or after yish. Reish Lakish says you're only chayev before yish, but not afterwards. And Rav Shimon says you're only chayev after yish. Okay. So again, Rav Yochanan Amar Chayev, Reish Lakish Amar Potter. Rav Yochanan Amar Chayev, Chayuv ben lifnei yish v'ein lo after yish. According to Rav Yochanan, you're always chayev. Reish Lakish Amar Potter. Chayuv lifnei yishu. The whole chayev and Reish Lakish makes sense. The chayev is only lifnei yish because you don't own it. You don't own it. And then when you sold it, that's where you're chayev dalad v'hei. However, after yish, you own it. So if you're already miyayish, if that owner was already miyayish, and then you own it, and then you sell it, you're selling that which is yours. And therefore, it makes a lot of sense according to the shita of Reish Lakish. You're only potter before yish, but not after yish. Eis Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan holds your always chayev, and he asks a question on Reish Lakish. Gana v'hikdish. Let's say a person stole something, and then he was makdish this item. V'acher. So therefore, you're gana, but you're somewhat of a tzaddik, I guess. Or you felt guilty for stealing, you're makdish it. V'acher kach tavach. And then afterwards, you slaughtered it. Now you didn't have a right to slaughter it because you were makdish it. So you did a couple of mistakes here. So misham tashumi kefel. So the din is that you, first of all, you have to pay kefel, not just the karen. Ve'ena misham tashumi arba v'chamisha. But you don't pay dalad v'hei. So you have to pay the owner kefel because you stole it, but you don't have to pay dalad v'hei, says Rashi, because the haki tavach, the hektish tavach. When you slaughtered the animal, you slaughtered that which was already belonged to hektish. V're'ehu amrachman yishalim shnayim l're'ehu v'lo hektish. You only have a chiyuv to pay to a hedgit, but not the hektish, because since it was you stole it, fine, so you have to pay that guy kefel. But now that you're makdish it, you no longer, if you shecht it, you're shechting something which belongs to hektish. There's no chiyuv dal v'hei. So Amos, when did all of this take place? Elim, if the owner's constantly expecting it back, so then mi kadosh, you have no right to be makdish it because it's not yours. Ish ki akdish es beisu kadosh amrachmana. Ma beisu shalos your house, av kol shalo, it has to be yours. So if it's not yours, you can't be makdish. So how could the Ganav have been able to makdish it if it was lifnei yish? So it can't be talking about lifnei yish. El pshito after yish. The whole case must be after yish. The owner gave up on it. And since the owner already gave up hope on it, now the Ganav v'chayr is kainit. And what do we see? The Achar Yish, there's a Chiyuv, which we see like the Shita Rav Yochanan, which, again, it sounds like the Shita Rav Yochanan, which is a Kasha on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is only Chai before Yish. We see Kuretz after Yish. The time of the Hikdishu, the Misham Tashim V'chamisha. The only reason why you don't have to pay Dal V'hei is because you owned it and you're makdish it. And since you're makdish it and you shechted it, you're not chayiv, which is mashma. The chi katavach, the hektish katavach. You shechted that which was hektish's. Of a low hiknish tavach, let's say you were not makdish it, you stole it, you own it because it was after Yish, and then you shecht it, then Misham Tashumi Arva V'chamisha. There's still a chiyuv of Dal Dehei. Now, if Yish actually works, why should you have to pay? It's his. We're talking about an unusual circumstance in which the Baalim were matishit in the hands of the Ganav. So, in other words, what happened was, it was before Yish. If it's before Yish, how can you be makdish? It has to be yours. The Ganav wasn't the one who was makdish. The before Yish, this person said, you know what, this item is stolen, it's still mine, I'm going to be makdish. He answer, right, because it's still his. But nonetheless, since he stole it, he has to still pay this guy kefel. But the Baal had the right to be able to be makdish because it was his, it was before Yish. Umi Kaddish, 1 second. How can he be Kaddish? Okay, but it's his, but still it's another problem. Let's say it was Gazelle, but the owner didn't lose up hope. So it's his. But the problem is that both of them can't be Makdish. The Ganav can't because it was for Yish, and it doesn't belong to him, so he can't be Makdish. But here's the key line. However, it has to be in your Rishus. So the owner also doesn't have ability to be makdish. So how could you say that's the case? So Amri Hudi Amri Kasnuin. He holds like the shita of the snuin. Okay, so let's hold off 1 second and let's look at Rashi. We're going to see later on, not too far from now, next daf on Samach Tes, Bekerem Rabbi. When it comes to the fourth year in which you're supposed to bring your vineyard, your crops, your wine to the Beis HaMikdash, hasnuin menichin. The modest ones would set it aside. B'nei adam chasidim, these are chasidim, sh'roitzim usalkinei kol adam min havera. I want to make sure that no one would sin. K'sheish keren ravai, when there was this time of keren ravai, the chayshish shem oichin mimenu arbi drachim b'li pidyon. They were concerned that maybe someone is going to pick at it. People are traveling, and they're going to grab some of your stuff right off the vine and start eating it. So these people aren't in a niyam, like in the case later of Rabdosa. So they did an avera by taking these fruits. They had no right to be able to do this. Okay, so let's look in the Gemara. Hasnuin menichin es hamois. They would designate money. They would say, Kol hanilkat mizeh yehem mechol al hamois elu. They were concerned. They didn't want people to sin with their things. So they said, I'm designated this money, that whoever takes anything from my crop, it'll be that's like chulin, and it'll be kainish onto my money. So this is the din. If you look at Rashi, Alma, what do we see from here? Afagav the leis b'shusayu, even though it's not in his rishus, mifrak, he could redeem it, but tafas l'hulu ma'is b'kedusha. So we see that, interestingly enough, that the din is that you have the ability to do this even if it's not in your rishus, as long as you have ownership over it. I wrote on the side over here. Interestingly, Reish Lakish argues with his din of Rav Yochanan as well. Okay, it's an interesting point. I'm not sure where we'll see that. I guess I saw that somewhere. I wrote that in my notations. Did not. All right, fine. So that's what it is. So therefore, again, this is how we're establishing the case. Ganav stole it. It was lifnei yish. The owner was makdish it. So now, if afterwards the Ganav sells it, there's no din dal v'hei, because it was lifnei yish. And also, how was it makdish? Because the owner had the right to be makdish it, because it's still his, even though it's not his rishus. Bari chazara keren l'bailim, but l'chayra, shouldn't you have to return the keren l'bailim, the original stuff? Says Rashi. Ishik dishu balim. Let's say again, we're talking about a case the owner was makdish the item. Kefel my mashalom. It says he has to pay kefel. But why? Hari chazar keren liyadam. the kedusha kol heichad isa v'kefel u'machayim el kishenimsus b'yad ganav. Kiksivim timatzi b'yadai. That's only what's found b'yad ganav. But over here, it's in the hands of hektish. So why would he have to pay kefel? The answer is kishamad badin. Says Rashi, Sheba Edim Kaidim Shekdishu Bailam, that there was already a chiyuv of kefil before the owner was makdish it. So Hechidami Idi Amri say Tain Loi, the basin said, go give it, Ma Iri Hikdish, if you lo Hikdish Nami lo Lachayve. Say Tain Lo is not enough. The Amar Rava, say Tain Lo, if he said that, Tavach Machar Potter. My timer, Kivanda Paskula Milsa, since the matter was completed, the Tavach Machar Havili Gazlan. Now, all of a sudden, he's not a Ganav, he's like a Gazlan. The Gazlan, only a Ganav pays Dal V'Hei, not a Gazlan. Not someone who's like an open Gazlan. So if he actually said, go and give it back, and he did it anyway, now all of a sudden it's an open situation of stealing. And therefore he falls in the category of a Gazlan, and the Gazlan doesn't pay Dal V'Hei. So you can't say that. Chayav Atalitin Loi, but if instead the basin said Chayav Atalitin Lo, but didn't actually instruct him to say, go out and do it, but they just reached a verdict, then you still have to pay Dal V'Hei. The matter has not been complete because it's only once they say Tainloi, but here all they said was that you're going to be Chayiv. So a Kati Ganavu, he still falls in the kind of a Ganav, and therefore a Ganav does have to pay Dal V'Hei. You're right, we have to be talking about that case where the basin said Chayvat Litin Loi. And therefore, for that reason, this was said, and he's still a Ganav, and therefore, because of that, he has a chiyuv. I'm talking about Dal V'Hei. He has a chiyuv to pay kefel. It's talking about a chiyuv of paying kefel to the owner. He does not pay Dal V'Hei. That's what we said. So, what happened? You have a Ganav, he stole something, and then the owner is makdish it. So the din is, if subsequently he's shechs it, he only has to pay kefil to the original owner. Why? Because he's still a Ganav. He's not a Gazlan. How's that possible? So again, we're talking about a case where the owner had the right to be makdish it because it's his, even though it's not his reshus. However, the other question is, so why does then, if he's makdish it, it's no longer in the hands of the Ganav. It's considered, so therefore we shouldn't fall in the category of chiyuv kefel because it says it's not biyadai. So you said no, it was considered biyadai because they already gave the psak of chayvat elitin loy, and therefore he has a chiyuv of paying kefel. If subsequently after that chiyuv takes place, then he shechs it, he's still considered a ganav, but he doesn't have to pay Dal V'Hei. But again, there's still going to be a chiyuv of paying kefel. Okay, a lot to unpack there. Hopefully you got it. We're going to stop there, but let's see maybe another question or two. Question 3. 2b. How do we see Rav Yochanan holds the chiyuv of selling is also before yish, which means before you're actually the owner still owns it. So he says, Lamadi Amar Yish Kani married a Balam Akdish. No, wrong question. Meganeva Benefesh. Because we went out by kidnapping. The Ein Yish Bailam. There's no Yish Balam. And Velo Hanu Maisav. Nonetheless, there's still a Chiyuv. So we see by Genevas Nefashis, by kidnapping, it's always Lifnei Yish. So we find that there's a din Chiyuv Lifnei Yish. Okay. Question 3. Tanya Gana v'hikdish v'yachach tavach mashon tashmi kefil. Mi hikdish ganav balam. So we end up saying the baal is the one who's makdish it. The ketzad hikdish har ze'enu shaloi ze'enu mershuso. So we hold like the snuin. Let's see what he writes first. Let me not go too far ahead of myself. So mandi yom yish loy kani. The yish didn't work. So Myri the ganav akdish. Maybe we're talking about the ganav was makdish it. V'havile yish v'shini rishos. Or and therefore he had the right because he had Yish and Shin Rishus, that's who was able to be Matashit. Or we're talking about the Baal was Matashit and it was before Yish, and we hold it the Snuin that after In Rishuso Chal Hektish. That still is going to be Chal. Okay, let's see. Probably another question over here. TA 26. Matvicha Shino Chazeres and Mechira Shino Chazeres Mabal Lamid al Mechira. What are we talking about? So as we saw, this is the same as question 1. This is TA 26. That just like when we're dealing, you can say maybe it's talking about only a 30-day sale, right? Or we're talking about a case of, according to one Mandiarmer, Dafgal Achriyish, Shenuchozer Salbalim. Okay, so that's another possible read. That was TA 26. We're talking about after Yish, which is Enuchazeres, or we're talking about, no, maybe before, just talking about 30 days. Okay, not sure we did that. TB 26. My time of the Mandi Ermer the Inchiv Dal the Hey Elwa b'moicher acher Yish. My time the Mandi Ermer Enuchiv El with Neyish. Okay, so let's see how he unpacks that. So why would you say only Lifnei Yish? Because why would you say so? If it's only Lifnei Yish, is because you don't own it, and therefore that's the reason why you're going to be chayiv, right? Well, Mandi Ermer the Mechayiv Dafko le'acher Yish mishum demoy nishtaresh bechet the Hanumaisav. The Mandi Ermer says you're chayiv Lifnei Yish is the sever Yish kani v'acher Yish shlohu tovecha meicher. It's yours, and therefore that's the reason why. Once it's yours, you're not going to be chayiv for dal b'hei. Ad kan.